If there's one thing I've learned revisiting countless games on old hardware over the years, it's finding myself gravitating towards games involving overhead, multi-directionally scrolling action, alongside those which try to do a bit more but simply challenge you to zap everything which moves. Alongside the likes of Nibs, I sunk plenty of time into Firefly during those days, and recently had the itch to want to revisit it. This is Beyond the Scanlines. Developed by Special Effects and published by Ocean in 1988, Firefly has you in charge of the titular vessel, though it's not filled with scoundrels aiming to misbehave, but rather returning to a destroyed Earth having completed a decades-long exploratory mission into deepest space. With the Mechanoid Empire having taken its place, you must set things right by travelling into the heart of the Mechanoid's machinery with a goal of taking out the power facilities to cripple it. The first thing you see when starting out is the sector map. Your goal is to move from the left side of the board all the way to the switch located on the far right. It may sound straightforward, but this is randomised on each playthrough, meaning it's the luck of the draw as to the challenges you'll experience en route. The planets are places you can't land. The Mechanoids are far too entrenched, and so you'd have no chance of surviving. The arrowheads are security checkpoints. If you could successfully select the right option, you could proceed. Otherwise, the map gets shuffled, and it's back to the start you go. Once you've reached an empty sector on the map, it's time for the action to begin. You've got one goal: locate the 4 energy points and overload them. Firstly, you need to acquire 4 yokers. Seriously, yokers. They'll periodically spawn out of the energy points. Once collected, they'll fill a gauge on your instrumentation. Once you've got 4, park yourself on the energy point, and it's time to destroy it. I'm sure you think it's one fancy sequence, right? There's a thumb up icon and a thumbs down icon. Hit the button at the right time to stop on the thumbs up, and boom, the energy point is toast. It sounds a little familiar, right? I mean, I hope you're a fan of Uridium's bonus sequence, because this mechanic is core to progressing in Firefly, and you're going to see it again, and again, and again throughout your time playing it. In fact, overloading subsequent energy points gets tougher, with the sequence getting faster and faster as you move through the stage. By the time you reach the last energy point, things get seriously fast, and you're going to need some serious reflexes, especially to get through without frustration. It's not the end of the world if you get it wrong though. Sure, you'll need another set of yokers to try again, and you also get a little damage as a penalty, but at least you can try again. Looking at the overall sector map, it shouldn't be a surprise to see there's quite a lot of levels on offer. In fact, surprisingly spacious ones, as we see here with the Spectrum version. Each open sector has its own layout. Whilst they start out simple and open, it isn't long until they start to close up and become quite the devious maze to navigate. Thankfully, you do have an overhead map view available, located at the bottom of the screen, which shows you your current position, those of the remaining energy points, along with the stage's teleporters. Yes, teleporters. Each level features a pair of them, and entering one triggers a sequence in which you must stop the spinning Firefly on the green spots 3 times to teleport to the opposing pod. As you check off each marker, the Firefly will rotate faster and faster. Unsurprisingly, messing up means you're going to take some more damage before you must make another attempt. Now this is where Firefly starts to get frustrating. You've got 2 resources in play, fuel and damage. The former is drained as you move about the level. In effect, it acts like a time limiter of sorts. The latter is impacted by failing the overload or teleport sequences, colliding with enemies, or being hit by their bullets. Now, whilst pickups do exist allowing you to replenish your fuel, or repair some of your damage, I find they're few and far between. It genuinely feels like a battle of attrition to complete each level, especially on the C64, where it isn't long before the enemy forces overwhelm you with firing stupendous numbers of bullets within a few stages. And it gets worse here because later levels have them spew out so many that I'd frequently see the sprite routines glitch out, and this became more and more commonplace in the later stages. Things are thankfully somewhat more balanced with the Spectrum version, with the enemy attacks only becoming unmanageable in the later stages. Regardless, this increase in intensity is kind of annoying, as the current stage will reset ongoing. Considering you're taken back to the sector map and can choose to tackle another stage, this isn't entirely a surprise. But it can feel like a bummer regardless, especially when you have only the one option to select in order to make progress. The C64 version just happens to suffer from a much bigger issue though: collision detection. Specifically that between the Firefly and the level walls. It's not really much of a problem with the earlier levels, but with the later ones requiring traversal through much tighter gaps in order to reach particular sections, you will find yourself needing to perform some seriously tight movements to get through. In fact, I'd go as far to say pixel perfect movements. And the main reason for that is simply that the Firefly has a degree of inertia as it moves about. Now, when you try to get through a pixel perfect gap, this kind of movement just doesn't work so well, as lining up to move through a tiny gap requires a serious amount of back and forth action. Back and forth, trying to get the right pixel to be positioned in order to move through the gap. And this, of course, eats up your precious fuel. Thankfully, with the Spectrum version, the differing level layouts it uses don't feature gaps which are anywhere near as tight to move through. In fact, the Spectrum version is simply better balanced here. It's less frustrating in terms of enemies and bullets, and that meant I was able to get quite a bit further into it whilst I was recording footage. Along with that, the collision detection against the walls is also much less restrictive, so even though the gaps are bigger, you're not going to find them as frustrating to move through. On a visual front, the C64 version unsurprisingly features smooth scrolling and plenty of colourful environments with many variable palettes across the stages. Outside of the sprite glitches seen in later levels, generally the sprites are pretty well defined and very easy to distinguish between enemies, their bullets, the power-up icons, alongside the yokers. On the Spectrum side of the fence, everything's clear to distinguish as well, especially with minimal colour clash, though you really only see it when hovering over a transporter or energy point. Like on the C64, each of the stages makes great use of the palette to make things unique in their own ways, a detail I can generally appreciate. Now let's talk audio. On the C64 front, there is some amazing music by Fred Gray here. Both the title theme and the main in-game tune are excellent and truly complement the atmosphere of the action as you work your way through the stages. The downside though is this is one of those games where you have the choice between music and sound effects, which is a bit of a pain as whilst set effects are well put together and generally informative, I personally appreciate games which manage to get both in place, and it's a detail that is sorely missed here. Firefly for the Spectrum is designed for the 48K hardware, so it's obviously going to be less impressive than what you get with the C64 version. It's got to be said though, the title tune is a great piece of work, alongside the sound effects in-game. Of course, set theme is actually quite different from that on the C64 version, but in my book it's just as enjoyable to listen to. When opening this video, I mentioned that I have fond memories of Firefly's C64 version, finding it an engaging challenge and one I had plenty of fun with in my youth. Revisiting it now, I can certainly say that my feelings towards it have cooled quite a bit. A large piece of that is dealing with the timing on those teleport and overload sequences. Having to sit there and time things repeatedly and frequently becomes old hat after a while, and is something that now I don't really feel is that engaging to the player in the long term. What is worse, however, is the collision detection between the Firefly and the walls, manifesting itself with level sections which are near impossible to navigate. Really takes you out of the action, because you're having to waste time nudging yourself with such minute precision in order to get through these sections of the level. The result of this is that Firefly on the C64 can be quite a frustrating experience when you're surrounded by countless enemies throwing enough bullet sprites to cause display glitches, with the game feeling like it wants to punish you for less than perfect play. As for the ZX Spectrum version, I really found myself getting quite engaged with it. Whilst it shares the timing-based challenge part of its design that I don't really like, thankfully the fewer enemies in play, alongside the less complex level designs and far more forgiving collisions, mean the overall experience is more than enjoyable enough to play. I certainly plan to put more time into this Spectrum incarnation, but alas, I don't think I can say the same for the C64 version, where I think I'm going to let my memories take precedence over playing it again in space year 2019. Sometimes nostalgia can spite you, right? Well, as always, if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a thumbs up, and let me know what you thought of Firefly, especially if you played both. But the most important thing is, thank you for watching, and I will catch you on the next Beyond the Scanlines.